Hi, welcome to Life and Hope, the first podcast from the Abortion Survivors Network. I'm Melissa Oden, the founder and the CEO and the author of You Carried Me, A Daughter's Memoir, and Abortion Survivors Break Their Silence, which will be published by Focus on the Family in January of 2024. Life and Hope is the only podcast dedicated to the stories, the statistics, the behind the curtain, beyond the news look at abortion survivors and the impact that attempted abortions have. Thanks for joining us in today's episode. This month of September is full of groundbreaking videos, podcast episodes, and events. So to hear more about those, listen to the very first episode of Life and Hope, which was with Karen and her amazing and courageous story. For today, I want to jump right on in and give you the chance to hear from another one of the amazing participants from our Stories video series, Liz. If you've been following along with the Stories videos, and if you haven't, you're seriously missing out. Go to the website, subscribe to the newsletter, find us on YouTube, and start watching those videos because they're all powerful in so many similar yet different ways. But if you have been following along, you likely have already figured out that Liz has a separate story from the rest of the participants that were featured. So she's not connected to Lauren and Kieran's story. But I can tell you that Liz and her family's story is just as powerful. Liz, thank you for joining me. And, you and I have already been talking about this before we even hit record, but I am just so honored to not only have you in the video series, but to personally have you and your family in my life. You guys bring me so much joy.
Thank you.
Like a couple times this week, if we're being very honest, like that is the stuff that keeps me going. Like I told somebody the other day, I sort of like have two speeds. I have cry or fight. Maybe they're not speeds. I don't know what I would call them, but that's my approach to life. And you guys bring out that cry in me, that very vulnerable, like I am just humbled and honored to be a part of your guys' lives.
Well, thank you. Thank you. You've been a lifeline for us and a streamline that keeps us not stopping and wondering where to go. But when I've got a question or Milena has a question, I could say, let's send a text to Melissa.
It's so funny because at this point in my life and my family and my marriage, like my husband was driving somewhere when I got Milena's text and he just kind of looks over at me and I just said, it's a tween survivor. I've got this thing going on. And he's like, okay, he doesn't even like, and that's what I love. I don't think people can understand unless they're in your shoes and ours to know what it's like to be living with this day to day.
Right.
So let's just start there. I mean, I know going into this video series that there were like, you guys had to pray over this. You had to contemplate whether this was the right thing to do for Milena. So let's just kind of start there. I mean, what do you have to consider as an adoptive parent of a survivor when you're thinking about being a part of a project, sharing Milena's story, sharing potentially her photo at some point? Like, what does this mean? How do you grapple?
Yeah, I think that there's always various stages of that as an adoptive parent. Whenever you are bringing that child home, you know that it for sure isn't your story yet because that child isn't even yours. And so you hold it in a special way where you know something about someone and you kind of wrestle with it, but you're really careful with who you tell because that someone is their own individual person. And then you bring this person home and their story becomes a part of your story, but yet it's still theirs. And I know that's something that professionals in the adoption world have worked really hard to make sure that parents see that the adoptee journey is one that needs to be handled with care and needs to be protected and needs to be honored. And so we've strived really hard. So Milena first learned her name about 7.5 years ago. And whenever we first learned her story, from that moment, we tried really hard to make sure that the people we told were people we knew were going to be safe for her, people who wouldn't use her story as a opportunity to blast information to the world, whether they were pro-life or pro-abortion. We wanted to make sure that she wouldn't hear things before we had the opportunity to talk to her about it, and that she was just protected all the way around, so that as she learned, because it was always going to be the goal to tell her. We didn't know how. We wondered sometimes, like, how could a person thrive after learning this information about themselves? So we really struggled with knowing, but we felt like the option was always open to tell her if the time came. How that looked, we didn't know. But that's
relatable.
Yeah. So, and having lots of tweens in the house, there's lots of conversations about things that we're like, I don't know how we're going to talk about this. But that was one of them. So we just wanted to make sure that we were honoring her and protecting her, so that as each step came to telling her story, and then after telling her story, she had the control she needed over it.
And that, I mean, I love that you use the word control, because again, I think most people can relate to this, whether they're an adoptee or not, whether they're a survivor or not. But for survivors, there is very much this lack of control that we feel, because we couldn't control even protecting our own life.
Yes.
And then we can't control, by and large, how the culture portrays us. We can't control people's perceptions about abortion and their misunderstandings. And survivors' identity is so interwoven with someone's belief about abortion. It is this very tangled web.
Yes. Yeah. And I think in our very PC culture, where we don't want to talk about things that upset people, the idea of abortion becomes a very pushed off view. Like, let's not talk about it because you're probably not dealing with it and I'm probably not dealing with it. And the only time we're going to talk about it is if I give you permission to do it, or I agree with you or don't agree with you. Like, we just don't want to talk about it. And so for Milena and our family, like, it's personal. Like, you can't separate the two. We can't not talk about it to save everybody else's feelings and emotions. And you can't keep it quiet to keep the roar down, because we're connected to its very existence. It's just like gun control, right? People who are most affected by mass shootings are the ones who are very affected to gun control bills, right? Like, they want to see something done, and that's how we feel. Like, you can't not talk about those things to keep everybody's feelings on the up and up. We're connected to it.
Yeah, and that's that other really interesting thing about survivors that I know that you guys have learned along the way through us, is that it's almost like, for a survivor, we feel like we have to tiptoe around the world and almost put on a mask, right? Or essentially hide a very big piece. I mean, the piece that started our whole lives, that is kind of like the end goal is for us as survivors to see it as a blessing, and as a whole part of us. But it is this constant conflict within our body and the trauma that we carry and the triggers of living in a world that supports abortion. But I don't think people can understand just how much it impacts a survivor to live in a culture that treats abortion the way that it does. So, I mean, that has to have impacted the way you guys thought about how to handle such a vulnerable yet important part of who Milena is.
Mm-hmm.
So for people who don't know, I mean, what's kind of the brief version of Milena's story? So we're trying to help people understand better who an abortion survivor is. I'm the survivor of a failed abortion, a saline abortion. I survived during Roe versus Wade in the United States. So I'm kind of that poster child of what most people think a survivor is, except I don't look like who people think an abortion survivor looks like. I mean, obviously survivors are shattering these misconceptions day in and day out. Like, we're not who you think we are.
Mm-hmm.
So what's Milena's story?
Right. So we brought Milena into our family in 2017. She was born in 2011 in Eastern Europe. She was born in Serbia. And she was part of a wanted pregnancy. Her birth mother had carried her pregnancy until she learned that the results of the amniocentesis showed the possibility of Milena having trisomy 13. Now, for trisomy 13, it can be a very devastating diagnosis for babies. A lot of them don't survive in the womb or have a lot of challenges in life if they are born alive. And even in the United States, doctors will suggest terminating pregnancies because they honestly have a misconception of the quality of life that trisomy 13 babies can have. So I just wanted to put a plug out there for those trisomy moms that they know that their kids have quality lives, and that they, especially with medical advancements, and there's so many parents who are told you can't do it, you're gonna just suffer and the kid's gonna suffer, and why suffer, so have an abortion. But there's a lot of brave parents who say, I'm gonna carry this baby as long as I can. And but unfortunately, Milena's birth mom, I don't know if she had that support, but the culture even in Serbia and Eastern Europe is not one that necessarily supports people who have special needs. And so there's a chance that she felt like it just wasn't going to be a positive outcome for her or Milena. And so she got permission to have a late-term abortion, had the procedure done at 28 weeks, and Milena was born alive. So she came out alive, and the doctor chose to send her off to the NICU, where they proceeded with life-saving work.
How small was she when she was born?
He was about 2 pounds. Yeah.
Yeah. As a 31-weeker, I was 214. So I had to think she was somewhere behind me a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. And unfortunately, we don't have any baby pictures, which is a hard thing for an adoptive parent. But we do have like a 1-year-old picture. And so and she was super cute.
I have no doubt whatsoever. I know what it was like for my mom and dad. So, my adoptive parents, to get that phone call about a little girl who had survived an abortion. It's real interesting for me because I look back through my adoption file, and it was just probably like in the last, 7 years or so, I found their home study that had been updated in early August of 1977. So my mom and dad were foster parents, and then they adopted my sister from another family. And then they were waiting for another child. But when their home study was adopted, that first part of August of 77, the social worker essentially said, hey, just letting you know, like, you guys are so far down on the list. Like there are so many people waiting for babies. So like your home study is updated, but it's going to be a while.
Mm-hmm.
But somehow by August 29th, things started happening and my mom and dad got the phone call about the little girl who was a special needs adoption because she survived a failed abortion.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't know how many people said no to me. I'm totally okay with that because I know that I am, my mom and dad are exactly who were intended to be my mom and dad, no doubt. But I can't imagine how scared my mom and dad were. I mean, I've heard some of the stories. I mean, they were scared of how little I was, how fragile I was, even when I went home to them just 2 months later, right? And I know Milena was much older by the time that you got her, but I think there is this, just this fierceness to want to protect our children.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can imagine that you guys went through that as well, even though she was older by the time you adopted her, like this fierce protection.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting bringing a child into your life at the age of 5. The word even protection is so dynamic because you don't exactly know what's going to come your way. So you don't know what you need to protect them from. You've got ideas of what could be the problem. And then that ends up not being a problem at all. And then you've got these other things that pop up and you're just like, I didn't see that coming. And so, I think that the struggle and the learning curve of letting Milena thrive on her own schedule and on her own way has been the best way that we've been trying to protect her and to push away anything that could keep her from becoming all that she's meant to be, because it looks different than most girls her typical age. Because she's had a lot of setbacks, and a lot of times she doesn't get the award because she doesn't get recognized in a group for this stellar achievement. But I think if people could look backwards, they'd say, oh my gosh, like she'd be, they'd be handing out trophies to her like crazy. So we've had to work really hard to help her develop and to know the value she has.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I love that point as well. I think any parent, adoptive or biological, can totally relate to the lesson we need to learn, which is to not only protect our children in the here and now and be looking forward, right? To what can I do to protect them or prepare them right now, to also protect and prepare them for the future, but also just that incredible lesson of like, man, you know what? Kids learn and grow and are ready for things in their own way and in their own time. Like every child is different. My 2 kids are radically different. And survivor to survivor, it's also different. So I'm the first person to tell a family like, man, I wish I could like give you this clear point in time that says, this is the time to tell your surviving child their story, but it doesn't exist.
Right.
So how did you guys navigate that? Milena kind of led you to that place?
Yes.
Knowing you needed to talk about it?
Right. Yes. I think that, I sought you out before we even brought Milena home 7 years ago. I said, we're bringing this child home. I don't, so I'm going to be leaning into you. And it took a while, I think. I had you in my back pocket, but it wasn't until closer to the time where we shared with Milena her story that, you and I really started connecting. And you said, hey, I got Kara, who is the Abortion Survivor Network therapist, and my husband and I met with her, and she just asked so many great questions, and she didn't tell us what to do, but we ended up coming away with a game plan. And essentially it was, this idea that when kids start asking questions, even if they don't know the answers, like it's their minds and their hearts saying that they're ready for the answers. And so we just started paying attention, and Milena was starting to ask more questions about her birth mom and the whys and our vague, young answers that we had been giving weren't satisfying her. And so we kind of we realized though we had to set up pins. So first, and because this was a story that was not only going to affect her, it was going to affect her brothers. We knew that we had to involve them into a portion of it so that they could also be prepared when they heard her story at a separate time. So the first thing we did was we had dinner together, and we got a baby book that showed how a baby grows from conception to birth. So that allowed all of them to know that there is a time before they're born where they're completely dependent on their mother for nutrition, how they grow, what they looked like, all those things. So we went through that. And then we knew our next step was going to be to educate them about the truth about abortion. And so, and just kind of create these stepping stones towards Milena's story, and not just one big floodgate at once.
Right.
So yes, exactly. So not only does her innocence get stolen with the existence that babies are killed inside their mother's wombs, but also oh, by the way, this happened to you. We didn't want to do that. So then there was another natural time that came where we were at a church and there were crosses up in honor of that were killed through their abortion. And so that gave us a very clear path to then educate them on what abortion was. And so we had these two things they knew now. And so that held us for a while until just more questions started coming with Milena. She started wondering more about her birth mom. What if her birth mom kept her? I think she started calling me Liz once instead of mom. So like, okay.
That's a sign.
Yeah, I think it's time to start, just she's ready for truth. And so we sat her down and we shared with her. We said, how babies are made, that abortion exists. And now let us share with you, the rest of your story. And that was, I know what corner of the couch we were on. It was, December, it was 2 years ago. And it was just so devastating to her anybody who knows Milena, it's just mind blowing to think of anybody not wanting a little Milena around. And so for her to just hear that was just so, so devastating, that the person who was supposed to be protecting her was the person who didn't want her. And there was just wailing, there was grief, there was anger, there was sorrow. And then the hardest part was there were questions after, and those questions didn't just happen that night. They were days after. And there were questions I didn't think of, which was well, is she going to come back and finish the job? It didn't work. So is she going to try and kill me? And that fear of the reality of it. And of course, was no, abortion is because the birth mom does not want to care for the baby, does not want that responsibility. Now that you're in our care, it's not something that she's even needs to think about. So we had to calm those fears, but those took time too. And so, just for her to have that worry that her life was at risk because of something that happened at that time 9 years ago, it's just so needless if you think about it, that she has to carry that burden.
Right. It's a huge burden. And that's one of those things that I often share with people as well who don't understand about survivors, right? Sometimes people, and obviously there are people who are going to listen to this who are going to be going, oh my gosh, I'm sorry, I didn't know. And that's why we're doing this, right? Is to help people better understand and better work through these kind of circumstances, because Milena's not alone. You guys are not alone as parents as well. But I often tell people like that Milena's response of, oh my gosh, is she going to come looking for me and try to finish the job? That is such a survivor response to even just daily life. It is irrational. As you get older, right, you start to figure that out of, right, this is an irrational fear. But from a research standpoint, our lives were in danger. Our fight or flight switch got turned on.
Yeah.
And we are constantly in that state of like, is this place safe? Is it not safe? Are you safe? Or am I not safe with you? And so that becomes very much the way we navigate our world and relationships. So yeah, such a common survivor experience. But I'm sure, Liz, for you guys, I mean, those days were so hard. And I think that's why a lot of times parents, especially adoptive parents who don't live with the exact story, they might have heard the story passed along to them, or they have the records. It's like, oh gosh, well, I'm going to set that one on a shelf and I'm never going to tell, because not only do I think it's maybe better for that survivor, but definitely better for me. I don't have to have that moment on the couch, and I don't have to have the days after and the weeks after and the years after. So what would you say, having gone through that, like what would you say to a parent right now, biological or adoptive, who is like, yeah, I don't want to deal with that aftermath?
Yeah, I think, man, that promo video, the most powerful moment, I think I've watched it like 50 times, and it's that chair in the dark with the light. And when she talks about how when we keep things in the dark, that's where trauma and shame is. And I'm not going to deal with that mess anymore. Trauma and shame gets us nowhere. And when we shed light, like light exposes, but light also gives life. And so, that's kind of the way we want to walk, is that, yeah, the light might hurt our eyes a little bit, but it's also going to give us this freshness and this ability to thrive and to grow. And so my suggestion and my thought to parents, biological or adoptive, is to first like build those building blocks, like build that security. So something I learned about was play therapy and its benefits. And so what I did with Milena, because when Milena was born, the reaction she got was, uh-oh, like she's alive, and people were disappointed. People were, scrambling. Like that was the reaction. But the reaction that causes attachment and causes a feeling of connected is one of joy and being happy to be seen and happy to be found. And so something that I did for a long time with Milena, even though she was 7, 8 years old, was I played peekaboo with her. And I created those moments of like, I am so happy to find you, because she didn't get that. And it takes like 100 moments to wipe away a traumatic moment. It takes so much repetition. Probably survivors of anything know that you can be traumatized in one night, but it takes 100 nights of just peace to remind you that it might not happen again, or that you're safe. And so it's that repetition of helping Milena to see that I am happy to have you. Because even if she isn't processing it consciously, subconsciously, like you were saying, the fight or flight, am I safe here? The messaging that she might not quite understand is, are people really happy to have me? So we did those building blocks and those building blocks of touch. Like, she was, again, whisked off to a NICU unit. Like she wasn't held and embraced. And so touching her and touching her skin and just helping her to know, like, you value you. That was all the building blocks that we had to keep building in order to get to this point where her story was just a part of her journey and not something that like stopped her and she couldn't move anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I would suggest to anyone who's in this journey. Like, if it's well known that it's best to tell them the truth and tell them the story, but you have to tell them the greater story before that. And the greater story is that they're wanted, that they matter, and that you love them. And you've got to help them see that. So then they can just keep moving forward after they hear their story.
Yeah, it's almost like aftercare, right? After you tell somebody their story, that you don't just walk away. I can't even tell you, Liz, how many times I hear this from survivors. And it happens in biological families and in adoptive families. A survivor will say, yeah, I was told my story. And then they told me, we're never going to talk about this again. Or don't you ever bring it up. And for the survivor, right? The survivor's like, oh my gosh, I clearly am a problem, right?
Yeah.
Like, that thing I can't control that has hurt me. Oh my gosh, this is such a shameful thing that even the people who I should like most be able to trust and love can't even handle my story. So I most certainly should never talk about this again.
Right. Yeah. And even, I mean, that's where you came in so well. Like Milena, she started processing things and she's like, is someone going to love me if I tell, them my story? And so it was such a healing thing for her to hear that you are married and have kids, because that allowed her to be like, okay, all right. Like that's what it can look like to be an abortion survivor. Someone who's married and has kids. And yes, you have to process it and you have to keep coming back to dealing with its effects, but you also are thriving and moving forward. And that's
I'm a sort of weird example, right? I mean, yes and no. I mean, I hope people can look at it and go, wow, you know what, you can heal and you can find your voice. But at the same time, I think my impacts are different because I work in this world, right? So I don't ever shut it off. I am living in other people's stories. I am working with the moms coming through our doors who are experiencing a failed abortion right now, and that baby's life hangs in the balance, right? So it's like I have a different healing process because I'm living it. But meeting Milena, that will always be one of my favorite experiences in my life. And there is something so redemptive about that, of, having been 14 and finding out my story and not knowing for so many years that there was ever anybody like me. So I just am so grateful that God has allowed me that opportunity to enter into people's lives so things can be different.
Yeah.
And to see myself, I see myself in her. When I see photos, when you send me a video, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's me. But at the same time, Milena's looking at me going, oh my gosh, it's me, right? I mean,
yeah.
There's something so incredible about that. And I'd like to talk about that, of what the role has been for this awareness that there are other people like her.
Yeah. Well, as we had talked about earlier, protecting her story, that became an overall theme. We were super careful who we told her story to, and very much prefaced like, this is private information, which it is. But also like, especially when I came to do the interview and the more we talk about this, I'm like, man, but this is more normal than we think. It's almost like the big mental awareness campaign that our whole country has gone through. Just like, people aren't alone when they're dealing with depression and anxiety, and look at the effects that happen because people think they're alone, right? Because we don't want to talk about the stigma. And so I'm just like, and I know Milena doesn't want people to feel like they're alone. And so yes, we want to protect, but also we want to normalize, because if normalize looks like a thriving Milena, that's something to celebrate, not to hide because it's uncomfortable to talk about. Yeah.
Well, and I remember when I met with her that day, and she was talking about, how she wanted to get married someday and have kids. And I remember saying to her, my job is to change our culture so that if and when you ever choose to tell your story, the people are not going to be scared by it.
Yeah.
And I mean that. I love everything that we do, but I think part of the biggest part is having to change our culture and raise this basic awareness to normalize it, like you said, so that people understand it and can accept us for who we are. That Milena should not have to be fearful of people knowing who she is.
Right.
And I think there is this there's a lot of misconceptions about survivors, but I think there is this misconception that, I don't know, that all the survivors are adults, that we all happened 40 years ago, because that's when abortions were failing the most.
Right. And we're even, that misconceptions here now of late-term abortions where people are like, no, that wouldn't happen now. People don't do that. And it's like, yeah, they do. There's states that allow abortions all the way up to birth. And
P.S., my child survived a late-term abortion at 28 weeks. I think
right.
I know.
Right. And people are always looking for ways to skirt the truth, rather than just saying, man, to be willing to live in that dichotomy of that existence of supporting abortion, yet I'm looking at a survivor face to face. And our country very much allows for this walk around, this snake around to get to, I want what I want and I'm going to get what I want, And so people will say, well, okay, it's wrong, but it never happens here, or it's not wrong, but it wouldn't happen like that. So we don't have to worry about that. We don't have to get into those kind of situations. And it's like, it very much does. And like you said, my daughter should not be ashamed for who she is, just like that's the story. That's the story that's happening all around our country. If the culture wants to play games about stories and people's identity mattering, or is mattering a word? That they matter, then we have to be willing to say, yes, if you think this people group matters, then shoot, survivors from abortions matter too. And they exist too. And they deserve to be seen and to be respected. And maybe you might have to get uncomfortable. Get over it.
Right.
Because she doesn't have to be. She does not have to be uncomfortable just to make other people feel comfortable.
Right. Exactly. And, I know you and I have talked about this before, but the media treatment of survivors and, many liberal politicians, I wish this was not a partisan issue. Life and humanity should not be a partisan issue, but it's treated as that. And as a parent, I know that it impacts you, and you've had something to say about that. Yeah. One of the things I love about you. But also, as Milena's getting older, that affects her too. So can we talk about that?
Yeah. I can't, as she grows up, I can't be in every peer group that she's going to be a part of, and when she's an adult, where her workplace, I can't walk with her into it and make sure that everybody's going to treat her with respect. And so we have to work really hard right now for her to understand her value. to set up guardrails for her to know, like, things that are really important. Your no matters. When you say no, people better listen, and your story matters, and you don't have to hide it. If you want to ask people questions and you feel safe doing that, by all means, do it. If you want to share your story with someone, do it. And then also, okay, what do we do if someone shoots you down and someone is mean? And thankfully, she hasn't had that happen. And we're really grateful for that. But the reality is people can be mean. And so I want to prepare her not to hide, but to be a strong enough force that she can take it. She can learn from it, as in, like, she can handle it in a healthy way, and then she can push it aside because it does not define her. And so, but those things happen because she learns how to do it now, not whenever she goes off and becomes an adult. Like, adults start learning how to be adults when they're children.
Yeah, and our culture is rife with those moments where, as a parent, you've got a lot of training going on, don't you? Like, probably if you've got the TV on, right? Even if you're driving around town, and like when Roe fell.
Yes. Yeah, we had our own experience with that. That was probably the hardest. That was the most publicly aware she became of people being fired up about Roe falling. She was glad. She had heard it on the radio. We talked about it, kind of got a better understanding of what it actually meant. And she was just really grateful. Like, she took it personally. She was really grateful that someone like her was being defended. And then we drove downtown and there was a rally going on at the courthouse. And it was almost audible hearing her shoulders fall, hearing her tear up, and just so frustrated as to why people would not want her around. And I know that those people don't have a Milena in mind,
right?
But that doesn't mean they're right, because they're saying it to Milena still, which they don't understand. They don't understand that whenever they hold a sign and they say that my body, my choice, then they're telling Milena that your choice, your body, your life doesn't matter. And that's the message that she's hearing.
Right. And that's consistent across the messages that we receive from culture, right? I can't think of any other population of people in the world where everybody is like, hey, we're going to support you. We're going to do these awareness campaigns. We're going to do everything we can to support you, but not you. Yeah. You don't even exist. Like, you are a figment of the Republican machine. Your adoptive parents must have just wanted to put you through heck, and themselves as well.
Yeah. And I kind of got this image in my head of, in the 1960s, whenever Ruby Bridges was the first Black kid who went into an all-white school, right? And when she was coming out, there were people who were yelling at her. Someone held a sign that said, "All I want for Christmas is a white school." And if we look back and look at that, I'm not sure many people would not be in disgust by that. And we would be disgusted by the people who weren't disgusted by that. Right? And that is the message my little girl gets when she sees people holding signs by the courthouse. And there's going to be a generation that looks back at that and is going to say, that was wrong. But it comes with movements like this, where we help them to see who these people are. Just like African Americans needed supported. They needed people to stand up and say, what you are doing is wrong. And these are people who deserve to be valued. That's the opportunity that Abortion Survivors Network gets to give survivors.
Yeah. Amen. Well said. I threw out a lot of questions that I was going to have us to potentially talk about, but I think one of them I want to ask you. If Milena was here today, because again, you're walking out what we've already talked about, which is you protect her, you respect her boundaries, her anonymity, which is something that we are very passionate about as well. Like even with adult survivors, we aren't plastering pictures everywhere. We aren't sharing people's story without their permission. When we do share photos of even adult survivors, that's because we have permission to do so. And we are even more passionate about it for young people because we care about them now and we care about them in the future.
Yeah.
So knowing that you get to essentially speak for her, and I know you talk to her before you do anything. If Milena was here today, what would her message to the audience be?
Yeah, I love it. She's so simple. I love words, and so I'll put about 50 words into one thing to be answered in one word. And yeah, she would say it's wrong. It's bad. If you had a kid or you were a kid who had problems, like her birth mom thought that she had trisomy 13, and someone did that to you, how would you feel? And that's the question that she has. Like, if someone treated you that way, how would you feel? And then her other message would be like, yeah, my story is sad and I get sad sometimes, but I love the life that I have. And then she'll name off her pigs and her chickens and her brother and her dog and mom and dad. But what blows me away is also her acknowledgement that her faith, she might not have the faith in her relationship with God that she does. If she would have stayed in, if things would have worked out with her birth mom, because in Serbia, Christianity is not well followed. It's not a foundational part of many people's lives. And so she sees the value of being a Wamsley, which is just a blessing to me. Like, it overwhelms me sometimes that she sees, because she almost gets an outside perspective sometimes. We all feel like we were born into this, but she feels like she was picked for this. And it makes me feel honored and like, yeah, the Wamsleys are cool. They are awesome.
You guys are cool. You guys are cool. If Milena's mom was somehow ever listening, just for theoretical, let's throw that out as a theoretical.
Yeah.
What would you say to her?
Yeah. I think the first thing I would say to her was that I was sorry that she didn't feel like she had the support she needed to carry on with the pregnancy and raise Milena. As a believer in Jesus and as a believer that the body of Christ is a gift to the world, it makes me sad that we weren't there for her to be in the trenches with her and hold her hand. And then the other thing I would say is thank you. Thank you, because who she is a part of who Milena is. And so there are things about Milena and probably quirks about Milena and things in Milena's DNA that, are from her. And so she's getting to impact the world in ways that she might not ever know, but it's far reaching.
I love that. Let's close today with one final question, and it's about you. I mean, how's that? You aren't just an amazing wife and mother, but you're a writer. So let's talk about that. What are the books you've written? What are the topics of them? Where can people find them?
Yeah, thanks for that. So I've written 2 children's books on They're through Amazon, and the first one is called Brave Milena, and that is just one of the building blocks that we use to help instill confidence in Milena of who we see her as. This book came before she learned her story, and so it just kind of goes through all the ways that we see her brave. But it's a really encouraging story because it's from this notion that, yeah, bravery comes through hard experiences. It comes through succeeding and failing. And we've seen Milena move through all those things in glorious ways. So that's that one. My second one is called Mama, What's an Abolitionist? And that is to educate families in a child-friendly way about ethical shopping and resources on how to connect with the world through chocolate and coffee, but in a way that helps others thrive in their lives and protects others rather than taking advantage of them so that we can receive our resources. So yeah, those are things that are found on Amazon if you look on my name. But yeah, I'm proud to be able to share those stories with people and to use words to excite the world. Like my favorite thing in the world is words.
You are always reading. I mean, Elizabeth Elliot, right?
Yeah.
I know this about you. And Milena, by the way, if people are looking for Brave Milena, is Milena.
Yes. Thank you.
And this would probably be a good time for me to say as well. I think I've talked to you about it. I mean, I've started a children's book for survivors, and that is something that's in process. If things would someday settle down, I'm always like, oh yeah, tomorrow I'm going to get back to that. And then something else happens, but it's all important. But yeah, I'm passionate like you of being able to reach our youngest survivors, because really our youngest survivors are babies right now who are just being born. We had a baby 2 weeks ago. Like I'm losing track of time at the time you and I are recording this. We had a baby born in August. Oh yeah, now I know what time it is in the world. We had a baby born in August who survived both abortion pills. And so that super Kara, as usual, had come alongside mom and supported her during her pregnancy when she was unsure of what she was going to do. And, you know, mom was going to make an adoption plan originally. And when baby was born, she knew how much she loved Baby Fellow is baby's name, and her family, who had been unsupportive of her before, came alongside her. And so those are our youngest survivors. And then we have survivors, you know, and they're younger than Milena. And then we have Milena's and teenagers and adults. And again, I just think people can't even begin to understand, like, we are living our lives right around you. We are probably not telling you our story because one of a million reasons, but most of it is because our culture is not safe. But yeah, I would love to be able to reach more young survivors. So when a parent is telling their Milena their story, it can be like, man, let's read the story together about survivors.
I love that. Yeah. And I think this whole picture that we're creating is the complete antithesis of what the message of abortion is. The message of abortion is, let's use this short-sighted solution to fix something, right? They're like, let's just fix it now. And then sometimes it's also really stressful, like you just feel like you can't handle it, so let's get rid of it. But the life of a survivor is that long-term impact of what comes after, you know, a failed abortion and what comes after birth. It's just such a long-term, beautiful picture. And that beauty shows up and it rises up. And I just wish that people would see that if we just hang on a little longer, you know, like just hang on, then we can experience that long-term impact rather than just trying to fix it right now and trying to end the problem right now. Like, there's a lot of beauty on the way, but we have to hold on to be able to see it.
And we're going to end on that because there's no better way to end it. Miss Words. I mean, you did it. You did it. I want to thank you again for sharing so vulnerably your guys' story, which is also Milena's story.
Mm-hmm.
Give her a hug from me. Tell her she can shoot me a text anytime. She can ask me the hard questions.
Good.
I'm here for it.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Just honored to have these kind of conversations with you.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to thank our listeners for tuning in for another episode of Life and Hope. I am Melissa Oden with the Abortion Survivors Network. You may not be Liz, you may not be Milena, you may not be Melissa, but you can help be a part of this by spreading this awareness that Liz and I have been talking about in this episode. We need you, the audience, to spread the good news that babies survive abortions and that there is hope where there is life. Please join us and be an advocate for survivors, for mothers, for families, and to end the generational trauma of abortion. Remember, you can look for Liz's books on Amazon, and you can follow the Abortion Survivors Network on Facebook and Instagram at the Abortion Survivors Network. Sign up for our mailing list on the website, abortionsurvivors.org. Subscribe to this podcast wherever podcasts are available. And most importantly, just keep sharing these good things with others. That's how we change the culture, is we share the stories, we share what we learn. Until next time, where there is life, there is hope.